Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Certainly glad you're here tonight. Those of you watching, last week we kind of had a party, so for those of you online, it was a crazy night. It was so good seeing some people decided that they'd come visit. They haven't seen them in a long time. We started this like 15 years ago, so some of them were from early on, and it was so good having them here. So it was crazy probably for those of you watching, and so tonight be a little more normal, I guess. If you don't have the notes, we're on session 31. I'd be happy to email them to you if you want to write me at ron@empowerministry.org. That's ron@empowerministry.org, and I'll be happy to send them to you. Well, anyways, I'd like to welcome everyone tonight. We're going to be on lesson 31, and we're going to start a series, probably 3 or 4 weeks, on habits. Habits. And you say, well, what in the world's habits got to do with emotional resilience? Well, I'd like to suggest it has a lot to do with emotional resilience, and we'll talk a little bit about that. On the table now, you have the devotions again, and some of the exercises that you can do that kind of help us. A lot of this is helping us with how do we relate to other people. And the best news is why I like doing it live even more than online is because we need each other. We need each other. We need to be able to help each other and look at each other and be happy with each other and let each other know that, hey, I'm happy to be with you, that you're important, that I see why God created you. All these things that help us feel better about ourselves and kind of, where we can think the right things about ourselves come because of other people. And so you have a real important role here tonight, not just to feed yourself, but to really make others feel welcome and loved. And that's so, so important. But why don't we open a prayer and we'll get started, okay? All right, so Father, I thank you for bringing us together tonight. I thank you, Lord, for this series on habits. Father, I just pray that you would speak to our hearts. What is it about habits? What is it that we're habitual creatures, and how can we change some of these things? And so, Father, I pray that you would speak to our hearts tonight, meet us where we are. Just give us some hints, Lord. Just teach us, Lord. Open our minds to receive what you want us to know. And so we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. God has created us as adaptive and habitual creatures, and that can be a blessing and it can be a curse. The nice thing about being adaptive is that, we can go against things sometimes that are hard and we can readjust ourselves. You never know. Life throws curves, right? I mean, there are a lot of things can happen, and we can learn to adapt and learn to make it through it. Sometimes, though, the negative thing is that we adapt and we never change anymore. We just kind of laissez-faire, right, and get used to things, and we've over-adapted, you might say. The same thing with habits. Habits can be a great thing. Habits can help us if they're the right kind of habits. If they're the wrong kind of habits, then it can get us into trouble. And the thing with habits is that it can go on and on and on and on, and pretty soon you're my age, right? And it hasn't been a year, it's been decades, right? And so we want to be able to look at some of those things, because here's the good news: we can change habits. Tell the person next to you, you can change habits, all right? Just in case they didn't believe me, all right? All right, you can change habits, okay? And that's what we're going to talk about some tonight. Now, when you think about it, what kind of things are habitual? Well, certainly behavior can be habitual, right? We can do the same thing, and that's good sometimes, right? We like to build in certain habits. Brushing our teeth would be a great habit, right? And there's things that, setting your alarm clock can be habitual, so it's nice to have routines, right? Little underarm deodorant won't hurt, yes. But anyways, so there's some good things that we can do that are habitual as far as behaviors. Thoughts. Do you know that a lot of our thoughts can be habitual in a sense that they can be triggered and then we respond in the same way? And these can be negative thoughts. and not just positive ones. Attitudes, sometimes our attitudes. Have you ever noticed that sometimes certain places you go or certain people you're around, all of a sudden you get this attitude, whether it's positive or negative. And so a lot of times reactions that we have, our brain looks forward to the path of least resistance. And a lot of times that's where the habits come from. And we need to really be able to identify what are some things that we might want to change. And so take the back of one of the pages or write down, and this is for your eyes only. But what are some things that you might want to change? Is there a habit you want to stop, or is there one that you want to add? Why don't you just spend a half a minute here in reflection and think? And if you believe that God can help you, why don't you say, Lord, give me a thought. Is there something that I need to change? And maybe I'll be challenged in the next 3 or 4 weeks here to really see a change. And just let's take 30 seconds or so and just meditate on that, okay? Now, if you're like me, you could probably put 10 or 20 things down, and I get it. But why don't you just just think about something that you might want to be changing here, that you would like to maybe have as a goal, and say, Lord, in the next 3 or 4 weeks, I want to apply some of this and see if indeed I can make a change. Now, maybe there's a habit you want to stop, or there might be a habit that you want to add, okay? And so either one, just kind of keep that, and why don't you keep that at home and look at it in the next weeks to come and see what can happen, okay? Here's the question, though. Are you ready for a change? Are you ready for a change? And, are you motivated toward it? As you consider what you want to change and add to your life, there's some things have been identified as steps or stages of readiness for change. Procrasta, Norcross, and De Clemente, in their book Changing for Good, wrote down 5 different stages of change, and you can see them in the middle of page 1 there. All right, and it's pre-contemplation. Now, pre-contemplation is before you start thinking about it, right? That's like, I'm not really considering a change. In this stage, we're often unaware and/or deny that we have a problem. That's sometimes what we call denial, right? Other people may know that you need a change, but you don't. Or maybe deep down you do, but you're kind of in denial. Now, it could be that you think you can't change, right? But for whatever reason, you're not quite there yet. Well, hopefully, what we're going to do in the next couple of weeks, and just by doing the exercise just a minute ago, might help you get into the next stage, which is contemplation. I'm becoming open to a change. And anything I've ever changed in my life has kind of been that way. You have to kind of be open to it first. You have to kind of say, maybe they're right, or maybe I should, or maybe there's something I can do about this. And so I'm becoming open, but I'm still not quite sure. And then the next one is the preparation stage. And preparation's where, I've made a commitment to change. I've begun to consider changes I need to make. So what am I going to have to do? What's going to have to change? And hopefully, if the thing you wrote down a few minutes ago, and you can change those, by the way, as you think about it more, hopefully what we're going to do in the next 3 or 4 weeks will give you some of that preparation you need. What are some of the things I can do that will help me with the change? And then that leads into action. I've started to take active steps toward my change, and I'm more confident of my success. And then there's the maintenance, and that's focused on maintenance. Now, up here, I've written a book called The Habit Challenge, and this is kind of the chart that goes with it. And we're not going to go through everything in the next couple of weeks. We don't have enough time, but we'll go through some of them. But what happens a lot of times is that the things that we're going to want to do is we're going to create a goal. What is it that we want to change? And if you're looking at something significant that you want to change, then I would suggest that, try to get a support team. Let someone know about it. Someone that you trust, someone that's a confidant, someone that could pray with you or help you and say, I'm really going to take a stab at this in the next 3 or 4 weeks as we talk about this. And I'm going to really try to see. And then we're going to talk about the habit formula tonight and the next week. And that we'll talk about you want to start applying the different things that we're going to talk about, okay? And then we want to regulate some of our triggers, right? And that we talked about emotional regulation, where we breathe and take it easy like that. That's part of the thing, too, because a lot of these come, like a wave, and we want to ride the wave. That's part of the regulation. Other things is if, we need to watch. For example, a lot of times I'll use food. If I want to have a low carb, then I might get rid of all the bread that I have hanging, the pastries that are on the counter. That might be a good way of not triggering me so much. And so we'll regulate the things. But then the things that we often forget are the emotional ones, and that's why we're doing it here in this class, because we need to practice emotional resilience. A lot of times we're triggered because of the emotions. It's an emotional response. And we want to manage our emotions, and then we want to use our spiritual resources. God created, I believe, the spiritual and emotional so closely together that as we use our spiritual resources, the Word of God, prayer, His presence, His promises, as we apply those things to our life, we'll find the strength we need, we'll find the help that we need. And that can be part of the maintenance, okay? All right, so at your tables here, let's get you talking now, all right? What do you think is probably some of the hardest part there? When you look at the 5 stages of change, what do you think are kind of the hardest ones? All right, so go ahead and discuss that amongst your group, okay? All right, take about 1 more minute. All right, 1 more minute. right, let's do a show of hands here, okay? Let's see which one. How many thought the pre-contemplative or the denial is one of the big problems? All right, so we're all in denial. Is that what we're saying? Oh, all right, no, all right. How about the contemplation? Kind of get to where you're thinking about it. All right, how about the preparation? Anyone think that's kind of one of the more harder ones? So we prepare for it. Okay, how about taking action? All right, yeah, that's like a health club membership, right? Buying is the easy part, right? Going every day is the hard part, right? Oh my gosh. All right, how many said maintenance? I heard that word a lot, yeah. All right. It depends upon the habit, I guess, too, right? You know, but all right, good. All right, that's good to know. So let's keep that in mind as we go along, because we'll try to talk about each one of those stages as we go through it and see if there's some things we can do about it, okay? Yeah, the on fire. I'm on fire, right. All right, so in order to change our habits, we need to look at what is a habit? What are some of the parts of a habit? And it's been well studied in that. The habit formula, you can look at the paragraph there. For a long time, it's been taught that much of our behaviors do stimulus and response and then a reward. That came right out of behaviorism years ago, decades ago. At MIT, they coined the phrase the habit loop. The loop consists of 3 steps. There's a cue. That's a trigger that tells your brain to go into automatic mode in which habits to use. And then there's a routine, which can be physical, mental, or emotional. Finally, there's a reward, which helps your brain figure out if this particular loop is worth remembering for the future. As you repeat your behavior over time, this loop becomes more and more automatic. The cue and reward become intertwined until a powerful sense of anticipation and craving emerges, and thus you can even end up with an addiction. So there's a slippery slope. If you can look at this a chart right here, a lot of times what starts off as impulsive, and so you're down on this end of the intensity of the urge. What starts off as impulsive can, as the intensity gets up, it becomes compulsive. It can become more compulsive behavior. On this end, you have an urge, but as you go up in your intensity, it ends up being more of a craving. And that's a physical thing. The striatum, that part of the brain, gets primed when it's experienced a reward. And so when it's primed and it senses, hey, a trigger, then it kicks out dopamine. And a lot of times we've said that dopamine is the reward drug. In a sense, it's really not. That's what it really is I got to have it. I got to have it. It's there to get us to do. So when you're hungry, right, dopamine starts kicking in, I got to have it. Now, today, that's not a problem. You got choices of all kinds of places. But that would keep people a long time ago going out foraging for a long time. That urge kept them because that hunger was there. And that hunger with that dopamine was keeping them to do it. And so a lot of times, that's what happens. Now, the good news is we can ride that wave. We can ride that wave, and we'll talk about that as we go along. And so what we'll have is then we have different things that we can do, and we talked about those already. And what we want to do is try to overcome some of that, okay? The good news is, we have here in bold print, is that we don't have to be slaves to the habits or cravings. They can be extinguished, ignored, obeyed, or replaced, right? And we do that by playing with those 3 components, okay? So let's look at the bottom of page 1, and apparently, there is page, well, there's no page on, okay, the others do have page numbers, okay? I always freak out with the page numbers. Remember when we had 7s on every page? Yeah. I was only right once that night. Turn to page 7. Which one? You know, anyways. All right. But let's look, because and I don't want to make this messy, but we're used to different terms, and I want to get it to where we can understand some of these terms interchangeably, okay? When we say a cue, another word for that can be stimulus, right? That's the scientific more word. Something comes in and says another word for that is trigger, right? Something brings it to our attention. Then there's a behavior. Another word for that is a response. And whatever way you need to think of it, sometimes it helps when we see that this is just a response. When we think in terms of behavior, we think, I can't change it. Oh, yes, you can. It's just a response. We have a choice. What do we say in here a lot? You have a choice today. Turn to the person next to you. I know you guys love doing this. I know. Turn to the person next to you and say, you've got a choice today, all right? All right? All right, we got to remember that, okay? And it helps sometimes to think of it in terms of a response than a hardwired behavior. It's not hardwired, it's wired, unfortunately. It's been repeated many times, but it's not hard. God didn't sit there with a soldering iron, and wire this into you, all right? And then there's a reward, and then I use the term benefit or gain, and I talked about that last time, and that's important. If we can start to understand, what am I gaining from this? Reward kind of puts it way out there. In fact, sometimes the reward isn't all that, but what are we gaining from this? Do I really need it? Is it worth it? Are the consequences worth what I just get to? And remember, we were talking about, and we'll talk about that later, how we need to make sure that our brain doesn't just know the reward, it knows the consequences. And unfortunately, a lot of times in habits, the brain doesn't remember them all at the same time, and we need to link those, okay? So another way, when it comes to breaking habits addiction, we can look at this one too, and this is what we've been teaching in here, and I'll go slow on it on the top of page 2. If you want to look at it in what we've been talking about in emotional resilience, there's an implicit alarm. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that a lot of these things, when it comes to our habitual reaction, a lot of our fears come out of memories. For example, I talked about, if your dad, was upset with you and you ended up thinking that, you weren't any good or you're going to get in trouble, I have to please everyone. That's how children think. And a lot of times we don't change that. And so, I use my example when the glasses go like this and he goes, Ron, I want to talk to you, that kind of thing. I don't know what yours is, but this would be an implicit alarm because it's coming. I don't know why it's there, but it's coming, as I look at it, it's coming from the past. It's coming from something in my past when this used to happen a lot, and that kind of look, that kind of noise, that kind of whatever. So some of the things that trigger us are somewhat from implicit alarms. And then what happens? Fight or flight, which a lot of our addictive behaviors are really fight or flight. Anger would be a fight. Well, anger can be a habit. Depression. A lot of times when we get all sad, that can be a habit. And then there's a temporary relief. And unfortunately, a lot of times it's not a long-term relief. It's just an escape. It's just an escape, and I get it. I mean, when that dopamine's pumping, when we're feeling bad about ourselves, we just want to get the heck out of there. I get that. But that's not solving anything. It's not doing. All it does is bring on self-condemnation and issues and problems, and so we need to figure out a better way. Now, another way we can say it is trigger. There's a craving. And then maybe there's excitement or escape, whatever it is we're getting out of that, okay? Now, in a sense, a lot of times it isn't always excitement. It can be just avoidance, right? Procrastination can become a habit. In my life, I've always, I don't know where that came from, but early on in my life, somehow God just allowed me to know that things were habitual. Now, maybe you were the same way, and I just, I'm not that unique, right? But I learned early on that if I did something, and I did it again and again, it could become a habit. And that always scared me, especially with things I didn't want to do. And so I knew early on, I better stop this or it's going to become a habit. And we need to, a lot of times, look, there's a trigger and then there's a craving. And a lot of times, like even procrastination, I used to think of myself, what am I doing? This, especially remember school, you have all those courses and all these homework assignments. I'm going to get in a lot of trouble here if I keep procrastinating. And I used to say, this is becoming a habit. And I need to work on changing the habit. And we need to think of some of that. Now, the next one is a lot of times there's anxiety or there's boredom. I'm going to talk about boredom in a few minutes because that one comes up a lot. A lot of people talk about boredom. Young people talk about boredom a lot, right? I'm bored with my grandkids. I'm bored. Oh, I thought you were a girl or a guy. No, I'm bored, That's like a self-definition or something, And unfortunately, they want to wrestle half the time, and I'm not quite up what I used to be. Stay bored, will you? But boredom can be a trigger for us sometimes, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And so with anxiety and boredom, a lot of times there's a soother, right? We're looking for something to soothe us or escape, and the relief is a numb distraction, temporary peace. So I've just thrown those out, not to mix you up so much, but to give you choices here. You put it in the language you need. You look at your own habit that you're thinking about changing and identify, because if you can name it, you can tame it, not claim it, all right? Tame it, all right? Tame it. Yeah, you can tame it, all right? And so what we want to do is tame these things. So I'm just giving you some different ways of looking at it, and you can ask yourself, okay, is this something that's just kind of creeping up, like maybe an implicit something that's triggering me from the past, or is it just, some kind of just a trigger, like that's just I need to get rid of because it's old habits and that. And so we want to look now at a different model, though. And so we have the traditional habit loop, which is trigger, response, reward. But you can change it, okay? And we're going to talk in the next weeks to come. How do we change the triggers? How do we change the response? How do we change the reward? The nice thing about this is that we can modify and change this loop, habit loop, to really be to our benefit. And so sometimes, we can work on these things. We can change the habit loop. And so, for example, a trigger, we can look for a better response, right? We can change the response. What would be better here? For example, if it's a habit of self-loathing, right? When certain things happen, I just start condemning myself. Now, you may not think that as a habit, but if you're doing it all the time, then I would say it's a habitual behavior. You may say, well, no, it's just a fact. I do it. Maybe there's choices. Maybe you don't have to have self-loathing. Maybe gratitude or acceptance of something, or maybe something else would be better, okay? And sometimes let's look at the reward. Sometimes instead of excitement or escape, maybe we need satisfaction. That's the difference between lust and love, right? Lust has all kinds of excitement to it, right? Perhaps it gets us excited for a little while, but does it really satisfy? Love, intimacy is what God created for us that brings satisfaction. Maybe that's why, the Rolling Stones back in my generation saying, I can't get no satisfaction. I could have told them that, but, the fact is we need to seek perhaps what satisfies rather than what's just some short term. So we can play with the different parts of this as we go along, okay? And so a lot of times when we have a trigger, we need to evaluate what's the need, what's really going on here, what am I being triggered for? And this is like the substitution model. And you might want to write that down, substitution model, because a lot of times we can substitute. Just because we're using something doesn't mean it's the best thing to use or the best thing to do, right? And so we're triggered, we feel a trigger, we ask ourselves, what's the need here? What's going on? What am I feeling? What am I needing here? Well, if I'm all anxious and I'm used to taking a drink to calm me down, well, the need is what? I'm anxious. I need to calm down. But maybe there's something better than alcohol. Now, alcohol does the job. I get it. It works with all 5 neurotransmitters in the brain. But maybe there's something better for us than that option, right? And maybe it's getting some help with what's making us anxious in the first place. And so we need to look at that. Then, what's a better response, right? We just mentioned that. What would be a better response than alcohol? If I'm all anxious, maybe the breathing, right? Maybe I need to just regulate, do some breathing, maybe take a walk, call a friend, right? So we substitute the behavior. And then instead of maybe we substitute the reward. Instead of numbing ourselves out or doing something, I'm just going to have one drink, and you know how that works usually, right? Instead of saying that and going that route, and then we feel all horrible, or we hit the porn, and then later we feel, what did I do that for, or whatever. Instead of those things, maybe there's something better that has a better solution and that has a better reward. Maybe calling that friend, maybe, reading something, maybe praying and meditating, or just breathing. Maybe, taking that walk has a better reward. It has less consequences. Sometimes not having the consequences of reward in itself. Does that make sense? Do you see what I'm saying? And so you need to think of that, okay? Or look at the next one. The trigger, we look at it and say, this is a trigger, and we rename it, and that's what we've been teaching in here a lot. We rename it. We say, this is a false alarm. I don't have to listen to it. And that's a great way to start. And that's hard on some of these addictive things, okay? I get it. It's hard. And then we decline it. I don't have to respond to it. And then we ride the wave. What goes up comes down. We can extinguish it. And, I'm not going to die if I don't do this. And that can work, even on hardcore type addictions. Once we know and believe that can work, we start working it, and we can start getting some victory. So those are the kinds of ways that we're going to be looking at some of these things, okay? I like the route because then we'll start getting some experience. Why don't you share at the table for a minute here? Has there ever been an experience where you've had a craving, or you wanted to do something, and you didn't want to do it, but you felt you should, and you were able to just ride the wave, and it kind of went away? See if anyone at your table had an experience like that, okay? See if there's been a time when you kind of waited it out and it went away, okay? That would fall under the maintenance that we talk about. All right, so share at your tables and see if anyone there has a story about that. All right, take about one more minute. All right. All right, let's continue then, okay? Now, it helps if you look at like the third paragraph from the bottom of 2 as you go up. When we look at behavior in terms of need instead of just an alarm or stimulus, we can ascertain whether it's a true need or a false alarm. Now, I don't know what habit you wrote down earlier, and for those of you who came in a few minutes afterwards, we wrote down what's some things that we might want to work on in the next week, couple weeks here. What might be a habit that we either want to add or we want to take away? We're kind of talking tonight about taking away, but a lot of times if we can look at what we're doing and ask ourselves, what is the need? What is this fulfilling here? You know, instead of just an alarm. Now, sometimes that's hard to figure out because we're so used to it. It becomes almost a dissociation. A lot of the things that we do, you know, for example, I wrote a little pamphlet called Downtime Temptation. And a lot of time our temptations come when everything shuts down. When we're busy during the day, we've got things to do, responsibilities, but sometimes you can think on your way home, you're already thinking about, boy, would that be nice to, and we get into that, and we're already starting to do it. It's an habitual thinking right from the get-go. And we need to ask ourselves, okay, what need is this fulfilling? I mean, it's not wrong to want to relax, for example, after a hard day. It's not wrong to do something for yourself. It's not wrong, but a lot of times we have attitudes that don't treat ourselves very good. Have a self-loathing type of feeling about ourselves. Why would we reward ourselves? Why would we do anything good for ourselves? Instead we'll escape. We'll do things that just help us get out of there. Just numb it, and you know what? I'll take care of it tomorrow. And tomorrow never comes, right? Mañana, right? We'll do it later, right? Is that the right word? Mañana never comes, right? And so we need to be careful with some of those things. And so when we look at our urge or cravings or whatever from a need, solution, satisfaction, it allows us to see what's going on. And so I want you to try to think of that. What can I substitute? What would be more satisfying? What would solve the problem? What is the problem? What am I doing this for? Really be your own detective this week, okay? That's part of your homework assignment here, is to start being, and pray over this. Pray over this. The habits come out of that basic part of our brain there, the part that just is stimulus response. And the prefrontal cortex a lot of times isn't online when that starts happening. And we need to use the prefrontal cortex, that rational part of our brain, ahead of time, right? Where we can be thinking of this. And the Spirit of God, allowing God to help us, between thinking rationally and asking the Lord for help, we can really come up with some ways that we can overcome some of these things that we want to clear up in our life. And it will take practice, and it will take repetition, because habits don't become habits once in one time, right? They're repeated over and over and over again. And so let's look at page 3 here, a little deeper at the 3 parts of the habit again, okay? And here again, I've got the different kinds of names. We'll call it the cue, but you can call it a trigger, a stimulus, craving, implicit memory signal, whatever fits your certain behavior here. And I'll use cue. A cue can be almost anything, something visual, a place, a time of day, emotional feeling, a series of thoughts that come into our head, groups of people, a person's look, physical sensation, a song, an event. I mean, you get the picture. All kinds of things can become triggers. It is something that triggers a response in us. And this response is an emotion. Not an emotion as we tend to think like just sadness type thing. Instead, what we've been talking about here, the word emotion means to move. It gets me to move. All of a sudden, that dopamine's turned on and bam, I've got to have it. I've got to go. So in that respect, it's an emotional, it's an urgency, right? And so the cue causes a sensation that causes us to act. And like I said before, that when we've primed that part of our brain to know that that's a trigger, then that dopamine comes on. And it helps to know that that's just a chemical reaction. And we can ride the wave. We can ride the wave, although it can be very intense sometimes, okay? And so there's different levels of triggers, all right? And so, sometimes we need to look a little more carefully and be surprised with I do that to ourselves, right? Don't have to be, no one's giving you a cape. You don't have to be Superman or woman, right? Just why do that until things get better? Don't put triggers in front of you that you don't have to. And so a lot of times, good time with friends, okay? How about you guys at D, your table?